Welcome back to House Rich, the world's best real estate show. I want to talk about the article I've seen floating around called Wells Fargo rejects half of its black applicants during the mortgage boom. And so I've seen part of the article. I also haven't read the article. I saw the headlines. But one thing I wanted to focus on, like I always try to focus on, solutions. So, what can we do as far as solutions? Because what happened. It's the past. So a couple things. One, I always tell you should always be interviewing the person that you're financing with in the first place. You should never just be running to your bank or running to the local lender or running to whoever your realtor told you. You need to interview the person that is going to be handling your financing. It's the biggest financial decision you will ever make in your life, most likely. And so that's step one, because like I said, it's easy to jump on Wells Fargo, and they are to be jumped on, but I've seen folks say, "Hell, that's why I need to work with brokers or this and that." It's always the person you're working with. It's not the institution. It's the person you're working with. That's the person that consults with you. That's the person that goes over your application. That's the one that decides to submit it, or that's the one that submits it, but in a certain way. That's the person that tells you, no, you need to tweak this or that before you submit it. So ultimately, it's always the person you're dealing with, less the actual institution. And so obviously there are institutions that are worse than others, and there are certain guidelines in place that'll make it easier or harder to apply at some institutions versus others when it comes to the mortgage process. Okay, and so let's say you get to the point where you've gotten rejected. The most important thing is to figure out why you were rejected in the first place. And so step one, you always want to ask the lender why you were rejected. A lot of times they'll call you, and honestly, I'm guilty of doing this myself. If you have a lot of files, you just say, "Hey, we're rejecting the application. Your credit score was too low." And sometimes folks will say, or the majority of times, folks will just say, "Okay," and carry on about their business. And so if it's somebody that's close to qualifying, typically lenders will go in a little bit more in depth, but you need to care about your application more than the lender cares about your application. So what does that mean? You need to ask them specific questions on why your file was denied. It is their obligation to tell you why you were denied. And honestly, a lender that won't go into depth on why you were denied is somebody you shouldn't have been working with in the first place. So I go back to make sure you're interviewing your lender. And so a couple questions you want to ask when you're interviewing your lender is, how long have you been in the business? What loan programs are you good with? What are your hours? What are your hours? You ask them what loan programs you specialize in, what down payment assistance programs you specialize in, and just ask them, how often can I call you and ask you if I have questions about the home buying process? I'm a first-time home buyer. I have a lot of questions. If they hesitate, they may not be the person to work with you. That's not good or not bad. People value their time differently. You may value your time or their time. So you want to make sure you're always interviewing that lender to make sure that you're figuring out what's what when it comes to the home buying process. All right. And so going back to why you were denied, ask specific questions. And so specifically, if you were denied due to credit, you need to know what your 3 credit scores were. Make sure you figure out what those 3 credit scores were, because they're just mortgage guidelines. So FHA, 500, 10% down, 580, 3.5% down, conventional 620, but really a 640. And so they're minimum lending guidelines, but there's also lender overlays. So lender overlays are guidelines that lenders put on top of the basic guidelines, because they're like, hey, I understand that the FHA says you only need this, but that's a little bit more risky. That's a little risky to us. And to get into the weeds, lenders sell their loans to investors, and investors are like, hey, that's risky. I don't want to buy this type of loan. Yada yada yada. Mortgage-backed securities, they package them, sell them, all that. And so, long story short, the majority of lenders put overlays or additional requirements on top of the basic guidelines. It's pretty much every lender does that. So you want to figure out if it was a lender overlay or an actual guideline. Because if it was hey, you're applying for a conventional loan and you got a 610, that's got nothing to do with Wells Fargo or your local lender, Rocket Mortgage, or whoever. It's just you don't meet the guidelines. So you want to ask what your credit score is, and you want to ask what the negative items are on your credit report. And so if you have a 610, I'm not sure where your credit score came from to begin with. You may have came from a 500, but a 610 is a low credit score. it is. And so you want to ask like, what's on your credit score that is holding you back? So whether it's too high credit limits, whether it's too much recent credit, new credit, whether it's, lates and stuff like that in your credit report, you want to ask those specific questions, because lenders for the most part cannot give you a copy of your credit report, but they can tell you what is on your credit report. If you're in person, sometimes I'll just turn around the computer screen and let you take a picture. But you can also just go to like annualcreditreport.com and download a free copy of your credit report as well. So that'll tell you what's actually on it. And so your lender will tell you the scores. You just can't get the actual scores from annualcreditreport.com. And so you want to get into those details and figure out, hey, what's the deal? Like, what's on this credit report that is dragging down my score to begin with? So now that you've done that, and so it could either be credit, excuse me, it could also be your DTI, your debt to income ratio. And so you want to ask them, what's your DTI or your debt to income ratio is for when it comes to your credit profile. And so depending on the program, there may be different DTI requirements. It may be 50%, it may be 43%, it may be 33%. It may depend. It may be impacted by your credit score as well, and it may be impacted by what type of program you're looking at. So you want to figure out what your debt to income ratio is and how that is impacting your credit score. And so when we go into debt to income ratio, we're also diving into, hey, could I pay off something to help me get under the requirement? Because if the lender's is going through stuff real quick, your debt to income ratio could be 60%, but it could be because you have like you have like a car payment on there. Maybe you have like a $1,500 left in your car payment, but your car payment is $500 a month. So that's what's killing your DTI. So paying off that $1,500 may drop your DTI from a 60 down to a 30%, and you may meet the guidelines at that point. But if you're dealing with a lender that maybe has like a lot of stuff in the pipeline, they may not look all the way down to the details. They maybe just trying to push you through. So you want to ask those detailed questions. And I'm gonna say this once again: if they're not willing to go into detail, you did a bad job of interviewing your lender in the first place. Always interview your lender. And so you want to find out your debt to income ratio requirements, and then the last part is a little bit more leeway there. It's the funds for the down payment. You need to meet the funds for the down payment guideline, but a lot of time lenders will, as long as you say you can get that money, lenders will kind of like assume you'll get it. Like I do that for my clients, because I would always say, hey, I'm telling you need $1,800 or $18,000 to purchase a home. Feel free to shop with this letter, but joke's on you if you $800. Because I told you that is the requirement. There's no way around that. So that's kind of what you're looking at from that aspect, are those funds for the down payment. So person over the institution. Say you can work with the broker. Brokers do have more programs available to you. But I would say this: I've seen the worst deals in my entire life from brokers, because they have way less oversight. So like when folks mess up, like a Wells Fargo messes up, they make the news. But when because they do hundreds of $1 million of loans. But when Joe's brokerage messes up, CNN or Fox News, they're not doing an article on Joe's brokerage. They're not pulling numbers on Joe's brokerage, who may do a great job. They may close 200 loans a year. That is a lot. That is a great job. They're probably a 7-figure loan officer or 7-figure brokerage. But Wells Fargo is closing 200 loans a day, an hour. I don't know, something like that. So it's not the same. It's not the same number. So just wanted to drop that note as far as kind of my thoughts on the article and the news. But like I said, make sure you're protecting yourself. And once again, no one should care more about your loan application than you can, whether it's Wells Fargo, whether it's your local broker, whether it's me, if you DM me questions. No one should care more about your loan process than you. So that's really all I got. If you guys have any questions as far as anything, reach out to me. Honestly, I basically said this at the beginning, I used to work for Wells Fargo like 4 years ago, and so I don't look at myself as a villain. I personally did not see anything suspicious at Wells Fargo, but like I said, it's really who you're working with, or maybe it's the kind of the climate from that actual area. Maybe certain regions have different leadership hires different people, and so it kind of trickles down from there. But that's my thoughts on the article. There's the world's That's Doggy right behind me. And so yeah, that's really it. You guys got questions, I hopefully have answers, or at least I'll try to provide answers for you. So until we meet again, all right, thanks.